Despite having more than a passing acquaintance with Gwen, I was not asked to weigh in on which panel I wanted to moderate. But had I been asked, I would have chosen this one. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Long before I led anything, I intuited, as the child of an ill father and a Holocaust survivor mother, that there was a benefit to knowing, understanding, and being understood by our leaders. From an early age, I wanted to know the people in charge, my friends' parents, the head of the cafeteria who saved me the hot grilled cheese sandwich, my pediatrician to make sure he didn't miss a crucial diagnosis, the mayor of Los Angeles, and the head of the Giving List Women. They may not have been as fun as the other kids, but leaders had the power. They could keep things as they were, they could change them. They could choose who would be safe or who would be at risk. Up until now, leadership has largely been identified with the patriarchy, a system we inherited in which men, primarily, hold titles, run institutions, and wield power. But across the world, women and a few good men are giving us insight as to how power might be defined and how leadership might be defined, because those two are really interconnected. And today, our amazing and large panel is going to discuss these issues. I'm not going to reintroduce you, but I'm going to ask a couple of questions to all of you and then ask some specific questions. So, all of you, we believe that most of us, I assume all of us, believe that the world would be better if there were more women leaders. And clearly, we believe that part of that reason is because if there were more women leaders, there would be more role models for our daughters and for our sons, and because women would be respected more if they wielded more power, if they were in more positions of power. But beyond that, we have a fantasy, at least, that if women were more leadership positions, they would lead better, that we would have a better world. That's our fantasy. So, but Gwen has often said that it's not enough for women just to lead. Women have to lead differently if we're going to have those results. So I wanted to ask each of you, incredible leaders in your own rights, what qualities and styles of leadership would you want women to bring to leadership that men have not traditionally brought? And I'll tee this off. I'll bring one reference back to yesterday when Fred Swaniker said, women have more competence, men have more confidence. So I'll just tee it off with that and ask each of you to maybe comment. Kimberlé?
All right, thank you. So it's such a pleasure to be back. Thank you, Gwen, for inviting me back. I don't know if I'm cold or nervous. Maybe a little bit of both. So I think that the first level of this question is redefining what power looks like. I think women leadership, when it works, understands that power doesn't come from dominance. It doesn't come from being the only one in the room that has the answer. It comes from being able to generate collaboration. It comes from being able to understand that leadership can be broader than the traditional way in which we've thought about it, which takes us to the fundamental question. It's not just whether women are in leadership, it's which women are in leadership, what their values are, how they collaborate, how they mentor, how they create. So in my own work and in my own leadership, I consider myself a bottom-up leader. I consider myself one who understands what it's like to be in a room, to feel marginalized in that room, to realize that not all rooms are safe, and that also might be my room as well. So leadership that moves from margin to center, leadership that challenges the conventional wisdom, leadership that challenges traditional understandings of meritocracy. Let's be honest. A lot of what counts as merit is how much does this next guy look like the old guy? So how do we step outside of those ways of reproducing that which always was, to have the courage and vision to reproduce something that's different?
Thank you.
Maria, that's beautiful. And I think, first of all, Gwen, I want all your friends. Like, look around, like, really. And, oftentimes you come to conferences and you kind of leave, and I was just like, no, this is actually a room of doers, of implementers and practitioners. And what fills me is when we look at leadership, it's everyone in this room, because I know that you're going back with an assignment. And I was very fortunate that I grew up in a matriarchy. I was very fortunate that my mother was a single mother and taught me grit, that I was raised by my 5 aunts and my Afro-Caribbean grandmother, who basically told me that you don't have choices. What you have is will, determination, and how you present yourself is how you present yourself and not how other people try to place you. And I find that really important in this moment, because sometimes we're asking, what is the difference between men and women leadership? And I finally, after doing the work at that time for almost 17 years, I had a proof point. And that was in 2018, when the Women's March kicked off the largest civil rights marches in our history. And what they produced was the most diverse, complex House of Representatives in our nation's history, that included the most women in our nation's history, that produced a body of work of 400 pieces of legislation that spoke to our values. They spoke about reproductive justice, about gun rights, about equity and climate. You go down the list, and not only did they fill the chambers, they were led by a woman who understood that bringing us together didn't stop at gender, but it brought us all together and lifted us all up. And that is our assignment now. I have to share with you that the work that we do, that's our assignment. Thank you. It's oftentimes, I think, in this desperate moment, disproportionately in the Latino community, where we have a young woman in Fresno who's 19 years old, who right now is, in many ways, helping to determine the fate of their family. She's the immigration lawyer. She is the breadwinner. She is the student. She may be the caretaker for her siblings. And I look at her and say, how do we give her agency? Because by giving someone agency, that is how we give them hope. It is through partnership and information on how she can take control of the moment we're living in.
So beautiful. So I actually grew up in a patriarchal household, one of 5 girls, but with a father who really believed in us and our potential. And I continue to challenge his belief system, and he continues to try to meet me halfway. And it's quite beautiful. I gave myself the title, with my husband's grace, first partner, because I wanted to expand what's possible. Obviously, I'd love to see a female governor in California sooner than later. I would love to see more of the feminine in leadership. Obviously, there are incredible men in leadership. I do credit my husband, policy-wise, for valuing and celebrating women, children, the family. But it has taken the partnership component, I would say, to normalize the values of care, empathy, and collaboration in even the most progressive of institutions, to de-silo government and create interagency working groups that are focused on centering women's lived experiences and perspectives in government that had not been done before. And my office has been credited with really normalizing that we all have lives outside of work, that care is ultimately what really matters, that the care economy needs to be valued, that women's voices need to be centered at the tables of power, that we aren't going to make progress unless women's wealth is addressed, women's health is addressed, and women's safety is addressed. So I guess what I'm just trying to say is that it is really, everything is possible when you bring the feminine into leadership, and men can bring it in, but it really is about partnership. And we women have a good knack of de-siloing and leaning into the myriad of benefits that happen when we are all working strategically and intentionally together. One thing I was not here yesterday, but I was at a convening in Ojai dealing with the horrific situation of pesticides and drift and the unique climate of Ojai with homes and schools right near ranches. And given that California is the largest agricultural producer, not just in our country, but the 5th largest in the world, and given that 40% of California is agricultural ranch land, this was a long time in coming, and it's something that we've been working on, and we've passed policies, but then there was some loophole or some shortcoming, and so I want to share that I was there with mothers and a few good men. So it really was probably 98% women, moms in the room, coming together and actually setting intentional goals between myself, the head of Cali PA, who is a mother, and the CDFA team, all women. And so it just gives me hope that so much is possible when we come together, and that's our first instinct as women.
Yeah, I'm working with women now for more than 35 years. And I can say at Panzi Hospital, especially, after to treat women who are victims of sexual violence, we are trying to bring them back in their community. And I can say that the women who are succeeding in their community are women who have a vision about what they want to achieve. And when you discuss with them, you can see that their vision is clear. They want to achieve things in the community. The second thing is the approached community. Women who are not thinking only about themselves, but are thinking about how I can be more useful for my community. And you can see that women, when they succeed in community, they're not succeeding for themselves, but for their children, for the community, fighting for the human rights of all the community. And this is something that I find very strong, where women are in the community and they want to make things happen. Most of the time, they know how to speak with people around them. So dialogue is very important. How to engage the community in this vision. How really to influence others to come and support the vision. And most of the time, to get a vision is a dream. But how to get this dream to be a reality? Sometimes it's very difficult. And in our experience, when a woman is able to give step by step what she wants to achieve and how she wants to achieve it, and be herself as a model in her community, be an example, not only by talking, but by acting. And I think that there we have women who are able to transform their pain in power in community. When they return back, they are really agents of change in their own community, even if they suffer a lot. But you can see that they have this transformative leadership, and also, I can say, servant leadership. So they are there not only for themselves, but they are there for the community. And I believe that with the women of Congo and the women I met in Colombia, in Ukraine, after the conflict, women are the best to rebuild the social fabric and rebuild the society. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you can all see why, in addition to receiving a Nobel Prize, being a Nobel laureate, Dr. Mukwege has been voted as one of the few good men. I'm going to ask another question, and maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Mukwege. Adam Grant, in his work on leadership, said that, I don't know why I decided to quote a man, but I like the concept. What set great men apart was what set great presidents apart was, and unfortunately someday they won't be the same sentence, was their intellectual curiosity and their openness. They were interested in hearing, he said, new views and revising their old ones. And most of us learned leadership from that patriarchal lens. So I am curious as to what have you each had to unlearn or rebuild in terms of your leadership, and what have been your greatest leadership challenges?
Wow. You know, most of the time we have impression, especially when you are a medical doctor, you have impression that you know everything and you can do everything, and patients have just to follow what you ask them to do. But what I learned is that we should be learning all our life. Because when I start to take care of victims of sexual violence, for me, after to make the operation for a woman who came to me with incontinence and repair, and she can be continent, I was so happy, proud of me, and say, I succeed to do something very, very important for these women who came to me, incontinent. She was smelling very bad, but now she can go back home, proud of herself. But what I discovered slowly, that this was my conception. And women start to teach me that this is one thing, but we need more than only to be physically repaired. We need more. And I think that it's the way that really our hospital, to be open, to listen, we would understand that a victim of sexual violence can't heal by herself. She needs community. She needs people who can support her, to tell her, we are here for you. We want to support you. And there I learned a lot, and today I can say that I still learning from victims of sexual violence.
So I learned to push myself from the patriarchy. And I am still unlearning that. And I've learned, and I'm still unlearning to not, there's a dance, right? You want to get things done. You kind of have to be clear, and you have to push and nudge a little bit. But there's a softness where you have to put things into people's listening. They don't always, adhere to your time schedule. But I've really learned, I think, birthing children, having colleagues who were birthing children, giving them maternity leave, panicking because like, oh my God, my rock star is gone. What am I gonna do? Learning to kind of practice retreating, self-care, slowing down, trusting in higher beings and the order of things, and being patient. All of those are, beautiful gifts, I would say, from above that that I'm learning and feel like I've definitely learned self-care in a way that I hadn't before. The other thing that I learned from the patriarchy that was dangerous was just that men were going to take care of me, that my dad was always going to be there to kind of take care of me. And I think it created a vulnerability and a dependency, and I had to learn how strong I was and how capable I was. And it definitely was modeled by my grandmothers, who were such strong women, and my mother, who's very strong, even if she is in a more patriarchal marriage, old-fashioned, different generation. But I am so grateful that I'm learning more of the balance between the yin and the yang. and that I'm learning more of the balance of self-advocacy, standing strong up to the patriarchy, and to and it's a gift when you learn that you ultimately can take care of yourself. You ultimately are responsible for yourself, and that you don't need someone to save you.
So I was born in Colombia to a single mother. Woo. To a single mother of Afro-Latino descent. And when I was 1 year old, she met my future father, who was a strapping 6'2" of Danish descent Californian. And shortly after, when I was around 3 years old, he got really ill. He ended up sort of, having encephalitis because he loved to caribou hunt and to fish, and basically the meat was undercooked. And long story short, we had to leave Bogota, that was 6 million on a bad day, inhabitants, to Geyserville, California, where in the last census was 2,000 people, right? Just to give you a little idea. And so we landed in California while my father was convalescing. He was the child of grape growers, so they were farmers. They didn't know what to do with a brown woman and a little girl. And so when my father was convalescing, they sent my mother to the fields. And I would say that I'm made for this moment of translating America to all these different bodies, right? And what I had to learn in my journey was coming home one time, and I love the United States, I love America, because I recognize very precisely that I had stayed in Colombia because of who my mother was, of her background, of being Black, of being all of it. My upward mobility, my socioeconomics, my ability to be who I was already defined. So despite what my mother had to come and do here, it was an incredible opportunity of what we can actually do together. But it was always the three of us. And then it was my grandmother, and then it was my aunts. And one of the things that I learned very quickly, the first time California broke my heart, was when our neighbors passed Proposition 187, the original Show Me Your Paper laws, where all of a sudden my neighbors in Sonoma, progressive Sonoma, was turning on each other, was asking whether or not my grandmother had citizenship or residency to even use the bathroom. And so I remember coming home from that Thanksgiving and convincing my aunts, my uncle, my grandmother to become US citizens, to register and to vote. I was 18 years old at the time, give or take a couple of years, right? And I remember just like we had that conversation, millions of young Latinos were having that conversation. Millions of Asians were having that conversation with their families. And they changed California from being a swing state to solidly blue. And so in 2004, when there was a precursor to the United States Census that said Latinos were the second largest population, not by migration, but by births, there was joy and trepidation. Because if my safe community of Sonoma can go against each other, and we've healed, but can go against each other, what was going to happen to that young woman in Georgia, in North Carolina, in Arizona, in Pennsylvania, and Nevada and Colorado? And so we did something unique. I said, you know what, I found a kindred spirit in Rosario.
I just want to interrupt you and say, I guess we could see now.
Well, no, but it was an idea that it was just basically, what can we do? Yeah. And we basically built Voto Latino for the first 3 years on our credit card. And I get to the point of leadership and vulnerability and what I needed to unlearn. Because I came from a house where we had to figure everything out internally. I had to overcome cultural barriers that I learned at home, that what happens in the home, whether it was figuring out how to make ends meet, whether it was domestic abuse, whether it was alcoholism, I had to learn how to say those realities out loud, to overcome them, and to start asking people for help. Because the vision of Voto Latino was not about my family. It was about the millions of young people that were turning 18 every single year and trying to meet their potential. And that was the hardest leadership, because it was a cultural unlearning that I had to do. And I have to say, the moment that I freed that it wasn't about me, but about the community and about the changing of America and enfranchisement, it was 3 women from Silicon Valley who took a bet on me. And it freed me to actually say, this is actually the path that we have to go for. And I am very, I'm sitting here, and 22 years later, we're always also recognizing that we have to adapt, to learn, because the Latino community is complex intergenerationally, on gender, but culturally, but also they're living a different experience today than even the one that I founded 20 years ago. And it's adapting to that.
Thank you. Kimberlé, what have you had to unlearn?
So my most enduring lessons about what I had to unlearn came from my time in law school. I was the generation that went to law school after the first generation broke through and inherited an institution that was willing to bring students in that were non-traditional, but that was it. They weren't willing to change the curriculum. They weren't willing to hire people of color and women, and they were pretty steadfast in their resistance. So I was part of a student movement that was demanding more diversity across all of these vectors. And as typically, as often is the case, typically the leadership is male and the workers are female. And that was pretty much how it rolled out, even in the 1980s in the law schools across America. But I still thought at that point that working hard, showing up, was the pathway to leadership, which of course was defined in terms of, did you get anointed as the leader? Were you told that you were the chair of the Third World Coalition? So I'm thinking this is gonna happen, because all of the existing leadership were third-year students. They were about to graduate, and I was pretty much the only one left standing. They decided to graduate without designating any leadership. So they created this entire leadership vacuum, which made me think, okay, this is a leaderless project, and it's going to go away. What I didn't realize was all that work that I did, even though it wasn't called leadership, was leadership. So effectively, even though there was no formal designation, all of that work fell on me. And eventually, we ended up taking over the law school and having a 3-day sit-in, standing on the dean's desk. Now, this was the funny thing about it, because I learned the value in leading from the bottom, because I was kind of obscured. The administration didn't know who was behind all of this stuff until we were in the dean's office. It was the biggest takeover since the Vietnam War. People were, the dean had to take off his shoes to step over us to get to his desk. And he was addressing himself to one of my friends, a white male who is my kind of partner in crime, and he was saying, you need to get out of here, blah, blah, blah. And my friend Bobby steps to the dean and says, this is the problem. The reason why you are unwilling to hire women of color, and that was one of my big issues, is that you don't see them in front of you. So you think I'm the leader, but the one who's the leader is the one standing behind you. I'm like, not now, Bobby. I don't need the recognition now. But what that taught me was a few things. One of the ways I lead is to provide concepts and names for things. You cannot transform things that you cannot name. And so we didn't have a name for what was happening at Harvard, and we didn't have a name especially for what was happening to women of color. So intersectionality came from my recognition that there was a dynamic, there were experiences that weren't being named within some of the traditional frameworks of either civil rights or feminism. So it came from that. And that may mean that you don't get to be recognized as the CEO of whatever. There are many other ways in which you can lead. So once I realized that, then I was good. But I had to reject that idea that you could only be a leader if people say you are a leader.
Jennifer, I'm going to jump into a question for you, but I just have to say I have a thought. I had a memory in listening to this building and rebuilding, and I thought back to one of my early years when I was working as an executive at NBC, and I had just become the head of NBC Productions, our in-house production company, and we had hired 2 women to work with me. And I remember sitting with the head of business affairs, and he said to me, "Boy, this is going to be a disaster." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "There's just going to be cat fights all the time." I don't even think I had heard that word before, but I remember thinking to myself right then, he is never going to see us disagree. And so one of the things that I'll just put into the rebuilding, in the quote yesterday, since I started with quotes of 2 men, with the Fred's quote about competence versus confidence, I'll say, I also think men bring a lot of competition to their leadership, and that was his notion. Men don't like to see women fighting with women, or they like it in only weird ways. And so I would say women lead with collaboration, or I aspire to women leading with collaboration rather than competition, to put 2 more C's into the notion. Jennifer, you have focused a spotlight on the way women are portrayed in the media and how this portrayal impacts culture and how culture shapes power. How are women leaders portrayed, and what narratives need to shift in order to move the world into a more just and gender-balanced direction?
Well, we're at a really interesting point in our nation's history, I would say. I have a film that's actually premiering at Tribeca in early June that's a follow-up to Misrepresentation, my first film. Misrepresentation looked at the underrepresentation of women in positions of power and influence and challenged the media's limited portrayals of women. Misrepresentation 2.0, or Misrepresentation Rise Up, which premieres in June, looks at technology and generative AI as the new backlash against girls' and women's mental health, safety, and political efficacy. The reason I bring this up in connection to leadership is because, yes, there is a double, triple bind, however you want to say it, with regards to women leaders. They need to be strong, but feminine enough or soft enough. And I think those are beautiful qualities and traits. And I actually think female leaders who are most successful have both. They have the femininity, the grace, the vulnerability that's anchored and rooted with the intelligence and the strength. So our time is coming, and we are all leaders, right? You don't have to be president or, in Congress or what have you, or a governor to be a leader. We're all leaders in our own right. But what is unique about right now, though, is as we have been rising and using our voices and standing in our power, technology has been tweaked and utilized, or I should say exploited, algorithmically, and for, benefits that accrue to money and power, and zero-sum thinking, by silencing our voices. So what we're seeing is that as women stand in their power and use their voice online, whether they are a public political figure or not, they are very quickly attacked. I was actually attacked last week. If you follow right-wing media, if you watch Fox News, you would think that you would be really worried for my mental health. You might call and just be like, "You okay? Are you, do we need to go, get you some self-care?" And that is what we do to powerful women. And that is, I would say, what is most at stake right now, because women are essential for not just a democracy to thrive. Women are essential for national security. Women are essential for world peace. Women are essential for sustainability. If we are actually going to address climate change, we need women and more of the feminine in leadership and at the tables of power. You know, we wouldn't have these, excuse me for saying this, but we wouldn't have these ugly oil rigs outside of this beautiful view if we had more women in leadership. We just wouldn't. If we had more of the feminine, if we had more of that long-term sustainable thinking. So just in closing, I mean, you know, this is our time. Yeah. And as men recognize the value of leaning into care, and they recognize the value of exposing their vulnerabilities, and their might at the same time, it's that duality, that dance. I think that we have the possibility and the opportunity to right the ship in this country and frankly, to inspire shifts around the world. But it's gonna require more of the feminine, and media and technology need to be held accountable for what they're doing to undermine us.
So, thank you. I have a question for each of the three of you. I know the clock in front of me says 8:47, and if men were organizing this conference, they would end right at 8:41. But I know they're going to let us get through these questions, but let's be aware of the time. Kimberlé, you spoke just now about the concept of intersectionality, which you advanced at a time when there was not clear language for what you were naming. And you have spoken about women experiencing power differently depending on race, class, and identity. How has intersectionality and the practice of speaking back to power, that you also reflect on in your memoir, Back Talker, shaped the way you think about leadership and how it impacts who gets seen and heard and taken seriously?
Yes, thank you. And, you know, I'm going to answer that question by continuing the conversation about what has to shift, because at the core of the idea that women's rights are human rights is the idea that our position, our status isn't just relevant to us, it's relevant to all of humanity. Intersectionality brings into that, when we think about women and the differences between us, we have to be inclusive of the ways that all women experience discrimination. My own epiphany about how significant that is to not just women of color and to women writ large, but to the nation, is happening right now as we are seeing the consequences of moments in our past when we did not lift up and embrace the experiences of women of color and Black women in particular. So I have a long chapter in the book about the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill moment. And I look around and I know a lot of you were actually alive and you remember this moment when a Black woman's story about sexual harassment was rendered marginalized and irrelevant, and the person telling it was framed as a traitor to her community because she was seen as interrupting the upward trajectory of an African-American man. And that was a moment of paralysis in the broad civil rights community. A lot of feminists didn't know how to speak to that question. A lot of people in my community didn't know how to resist Clarence Thomas' framing of being held accountable as a high-tech lynching. Can I say shit show? It was a shit show. It was absolutely a terrible moment. And Black women in that moment were so silenced that they actually had to buy an ad in the New York Times, $140,000 in today's dollars, just to say, excuse us, what happens to us is relevant not to us alone, but to the entire community. I think a lot of people just thought that that was blowing up. It wasn't really telling the truth. Now, let me tell you some of the cases that have shaped modern democracy. The campaign finance reform case that has turned politics into a market where billionaires get to basically determine what our future looks like. That was made possible by a 5-4 decision with Clarence Thomas being the fifth vote. Let's talk about the Voting Rights Act, right? Which now is it's potentially on its deathbed because of the Supreme Court. Think about what difference it would have made had the Voting Rights Act been enforced in this last election. So I could go on and on. The basic point is simply to say that intersectionality is not simply an issue for people who are multiply marginalized. It's an issue for our entire democracy. We have fallen apart in large part because our movements weren't cross-articulated. We have fallen apart because we thought, well, you know, too bad for Anita Hill rather than too bad for all of us. So that's what intersectionality brings to the table.
Okay. Two more voices we are going to hear. Dr. Mukwege, you have talked about, you've been clear about what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo and where women are absorbing the most of ongoing violence. And we also heard from the amazing Chantal in the last panel. Your work at Pansy goes far beyond medical care. You help women rebuild lives, their dignity, and their sense of self. What have you seen change when women are truly at the center of the process as survivors and as leaders? And how can you talk to us in 2 minutes or less about rebuilding power from the ground up?
2 minutes will not be enough. But at Pansy Hospital, really, what we can see is how we can dream Congo in the future. Because when I'm dealing with women, really, they are giving me hope for the future, even if in the country is a total chaos. When women come at Pansy, most of the times they are really wounded in a very bad way. Rape is used as a weapon of war, and to use rape as a weapon of war is not only to destroy women, but is also to destroy family and community. So when they come at the hospital, most of the time, they are just completely in a situation that they can't dream, because most of the time the husband rejects them, the community rejects them. When they are bad, wounded, they can be linking, so they are smelling bad. So there is no hope in this condition. And as I said, at Pansy, as a hospital, what we are doing is to try to fix things physically. But rape in the context of war is not only to destroy the body, it's to destroy women completely. So their mind is also destroyed. And at the beginning, it was very difficult for us to fix this question. So we brought psychologists in our system, and we could see very quickly that women can stand up, start to smile, but this is not enough. What is needed when women start to stand up is to break silence, to talk. Because silence is a tool used by perpetrators to keep women under control. And when women take back their word, when women can just start to talk about what happened to them, they take back their power. And there, it's a way to put the perpetrators to be ashamed, and the shame will not be on the victim. And it is at this time that the hospital start to understand what can we do more for victims of sexual violence. So we start a third pillar to support them to be autonomous, to support them to get their own business. So, and most of the time is for their children, to send their children to school, to feed their children, and sometimes to get also a shelter. But when women are enough strong, the last question is, why this happened to me? And in a country where there is no justice, they're coming back to the hospital and say, Now I can do my business. I'm traveling, I'm going to China to bring some goods, but what I want is to get justice. And of course, in our population, sometimes we have impression that when women ask justice, it's because they want to get a kind of reparation, get some money or so on. But in my country, to go to justice, you can't get anything. No one can pay a single dollar as reparation, but it's to bring back the dignity. Justice is to support, to give back the dignity of women. Women want that the community can recognize them as victims. And this is very important. And for us, justice is in the process of healing. When you escape justice in the process of healing, you are not supporting enough women. And at the end, now really you are working for reparation. And this reparation can be, I was talking with I was in Colombia, talking with women, autochthone women, and they said, for us reparation is to repair the motherland. Yes, and so they will be wounded when they will rape, but what they want us to do is the reparation of the motherland. So reparation can be completely different. If you have 100 women in the room, each of them can get his own way to see reparation, to feel that it happened to me, but the community support and accept me, and they make this reparation. So I think that today, Panzi Hospital is using this holistic model, not only in Congo, but in many countries. We'd be happy to build a Panzi Hospital in Colombia. And women of Colombia are the most strong women I met around the world. Really, really. Thank you.
I didn't pay him to say that.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I don't want to offend a strong woman and not give her the final question. So, Maria, Voto Latino uses media and technology to encourage younger generation of Latinx voters to participate politically. What messages are you sending these voters regarding the intersection of Latinx voting and women in leadership?
So from the beginning, Voto Latino, we've recognized intersectionality, that we did not know the words for it, because a Latino is a mother, a sister, an aunt, binary, non-binary. The climate impacts us. We are at the center of so many things, but what makes us so different is that we are so much younger than the rest of America. To give you an idea, if I were to have a plot graph right here of the most common age among whites in this country, it's 58 years old. African Americans, it's roughly 34 years old. Latinos, who can tell me? 15. Wow. 15 years old. So I am the beginning of a wave behind me. And that wave, since the 2024 election, there are 2 million more young Latinos that have turned 18 in time for this election. Wow. So that's opportunity. And because we embrace technology, we're not afraid of it. We started actually using AI for good. We started identifying people that looked a lot like our voter file and said, oh my gosh, we started doing it in 2018. So in 2016, we went from registering 200,000 voters to by 2020 registering 650,000. And it's because we recognize that we haven't answered the right question, and is that, what do we need to do to get people into the game? And of the people we register, 82% of them go out and to vote. That's not small. We know how to keep them involved. But the challenge right now is that our elected officials have not met their end of the bargain of delivering what people need. And our job right now is saying, when you participate, because we have proof points in 2018 and 2020, when there's mass participation by multicultural America, we change the trajectory of this country. And if you want to know our power and how they're afraid of it, just look at the SAVE Act. How many of you are all familiar with the SAVE Act? The SAVE Act is going to disenfranchise literally 50% of the voting population, women. It's going to disenfranchise elderly women. It's going to disenfranchise women of color. It's going to disenfranchise young people. Why? Because it was that perfect trifecta of women and young people that came together in the last two elections in 2018 and 2020 that changed the directory and said, this is the blueprint of the 21st century. And then we got into our heads that we got a little tired in 2022. And in 2024, in the Latino community, a whole third of individuals who had voted in 2020 did not vote in 2024 because the system wasn't changing fast enough. And so I shared with you that I was politicized in California in my beautiful progressive city of Sonoma proper because of anti-immigrant sentiment. And this is the moment right now for all of us in the room to lean into their bigotry, misogyny, and to cement a progressive movement in this country. And I don't say that small, because I can talk to a woman in Minnesota who said that immigrant issues were not their issues, and all of a sudden she says, yes, hell it is. And I can talk to a young Texan who said they didn't think that they could participate last time, but there's 4 million of them sitting on the sidelines, who just told me in Super Tuesday in a primary that they were participating at the same levels as if they were participating in a presidential election. And that means that we lean in and we lean big, because how we vote come November, it's a firewall to prepare for 2028 and for the census that you were discussing around gerrymandering, all that. But more importantly, the world is watching. And they're watching us very closely, because how we determine the 2026 election is going to have repercussions globally. And I don't need to share it with you, all of you, but I do think that we have this unique moment. So Cecile Richards was a mentor of mine, and I remember the first time I was, you ask, who do you learn from? I've been able to be on the front row of meeting such extraordinary women. She invited me to be on the board when she first joined, and I remember I was devastated the first time that this president was elected. I can't even say his name. He was elected. And I remember taking her out for a drink, and first of all, I ordered a charcuterie board, and she's like, Maria Teresa, I'm a vegetarian. I'm like, of course you are, Cecile. And she's like, well, what's going on? This is literally right after the election. And she says, don't you see? It's devastating in this moment. It feels that way. It feels heavy. But this is opportunity. Because all of a sudden, the American public is going to witness the difference between justice and greed and injustice. And that mind shift allowed me to be able to do my work differently, but she was in the ear of all these leaders that allowed us to make our lives different, but also recognizing that it was a group of women disproportionately running the organizations, because like I said, we have one assignment and there's no plan B. So,
this is an amazing panel. This is the final question I was going to ask, which I'm going to ask all of you instead, just to think about as you leave here, which is Brené Brown and Jim Collins in Brené's book on writing on leadership. She emphasized the importance of a daring mindset. And the question I was going to ask each of you, but I ask all of you as leaders, is you all clearly have impressive skills. What would you like your next dare to be?